Welcome to Bitcoin Fixes This, where we explore the impact that Bitcoin will have in all aspects of society. Today's guest is Bitcoin mechanic, musician, podcaster, and Bitcoiner. We talk about his experiences in the music industry, the punk attitude, and its similarity to fiat money and Bitcoin. Mechanic also tells us about how he got obsessed with Bitcoin, why he's looking to leave Canada, and why planning for the future really needs to take this into account. Bitcoin Mechanic is a really talented musician. At one point, I saw him play bass, piano, and sing at the same time. This isn't surprising since he's been getting paid for playing music since he was 10 years old. He embodies a lot of the punk anti-authoritarian spirit that used to be prevalent in music, but isn't anymore. It's that attitude that's getting him to move. This episode will hopefully help you understand what the punk in cypherpunk means. Bitcoin Mechanic, how's everything going, man?
Yeah, it's beautiful. We're sitting down here in Mexico, thanks to Ugly Old Goat. He put on this Bitcoin Standard Conference, and he's done an amazing job with it. He's treated us like kings. We're staring right now at this giant, enormous mountain next to this amazing horsepower ranch. I don't know, it's been amazing. It was a small conference, not that many people attended, but it's one that I really hope to see grow a lot, and it deserves to.
Yeah, and very family friendly as well, right? Like you got to bring your family. I drove my family, so it's Ugly Old Goat has his whole family, extended family. Really, it's been very fun.
Yeah, it has. Miami wouldn't have been, Bitcoin 2021. I'm glad I didn't bring my family to that. That was absolutely like the line to get in was like 2 hours long, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, straight up, I asked Goat immediately when he sort of contacted me and said, do you want to do this? I was like, I've got to bring my family. And he's like, don't worry, it's very family friendly. Jimmy's bringing his. He said Giacomo's bringing his too, but Giacomo only ended up traveling with Mir and not bringing his baby. So yeah, I mean, it was really family friendly. It's been just beautiful. And yeah, to segue into what I think we're going to be talking about, we were also checking out and auditioning Mexico as a place to live, at least for the short term, just while Canada gets its shit together, because it's not looking great. Canada seems to be sort of following along Australia in the draconian, irrational, unscientific measures against COVID, and it's not appealing. It's quite worrying, really.
Yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit because, you had some things to say at the conference about why people are sort of like so compliant on all this stuff. And Canada and Australia seem to like be really bad, like those two places in particular. And they're kind of known as, places that are nice to live normally for the rest of the world. It seemed to have turned on its head. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Svetsky got in my head a couple of days ago with his theories, and one of his theories that I'm digesting, I don't know if I'm sure how true it is yet, is that the wealthier the country, the more they can afford to do these indulgent measures like zero COVID, which is literally like, we are not letting you out of your house until the cold doesn't exist anymore, or at least something as hard to cure as the common cold, which is basically like, it's a modern day rain dance, as Stefan Levara puts it. It's not a thing that can realistically be done, but you can indulge in it if your country is really wealthy. And Canada does well, Australia does well. Poorer countries can't afford to do that stuff. I mean, it was the same. It's kind of, a state level version of what we saw on an individual basis, which was, for the whole of 2020, a lot of people. I saw someone characterize the whole thing as COVID hysteria is middle class and rich people staying at home while poor people bring them things like Uber Eats and like Amazon delivery drivers. Like, it's basically like that on a national scale, right? Like, no one in Mexico is locking down because they just can't. They need to work. They need to survive. They're living, but people like in Western elite, rich circumstances can really spend 8 months without going outside, and if they get mail, spray it with whatever like we all did it a bit. No, not we all, like some people, like like Joyce, my other half, she, to her credit, she smelt bullshit right away. She was like, this is nonsense, I'm not worried about this. She has a background in biology, so she understood more about what coronaviruses are, and I didn't, so I was paranoid as heck for about 6 weeks or something, and then by around, I think around early April 2020, that's when I was like, oh, well, I go to my normal pathological fear of authoritarianism, and that's my immune system can't cure that, right? So I was done at that point. I was like, that's it. I don't care about COVID at all anymore. Like, if I get it, whatever. But there's nothing I can do to, like, these freedoms are going to take decades to get back. Like, just the general understanding that it's okay to, I mean, 9/11, you never saw those measures disappear from airports ever, and they were all temporary. Patriot Act, it's all supposed to be temporary. It never is. You know, that adage, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government measure. So, yeah, it started to get very worrying for me last spring. And, you know, here we are in at the end of...
We're in year 2, right? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, everyone at the end of 2020 was like, that sucked, but, you know, let's all wave goodbye to that awful year. You don't realize it's only just starting. Like, you know, it doesn't...
It's August already.
Yeah. Well, COVID is seasonal. We know that, right?
Yeah.
So this is summer. This is easy. Like, Canada, my province, BC, just said no more mask mandates. So they relaxed it a lot. But I know what's going to happen. In about a month or two, they've already stated unequivocally that they're going for vaccine passports. Not in my province, but my province tends to do what the others do just a bit later, which is annoying because the science has already been demonstrated to not work. So it's kind of, it gives us more time to flee, but at the same time, it's even more maddening when they made kids wear masks in schools this year. In 2021, they brought that in March 2021, and we're like, but we've got the data now. What are you talking about? We know that these things don't work. Like, it made sense as a precaution at the beginning to be, you know, like, better safe than sorry. Now we just know they don't work. And for kids don't get affected by COVID. You know, we know that's like, oh man. Well, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I lost my train of thought with that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were going on about what's going on in Canada and stuff, and about how richer countries can sort of afford to do that. And you live in Canada, and it seems to be locking down harder than almost any other country, other than maybe Australia. And, you know, I mean, what's going on there? Why is Canada, like, going so extreme here?
It's a good question. I don't know why. I mean, you do have. I don't know. I'm loath to characterize a nation as having a sort of personality or something. I remember a discussion between Kasparov and I think it was like Bill Maher or one of these, like, you know, American TV comedians, where, you know, he was saying, why do you have Vladimir Putin? And is it something to do with the Russian spirit that has it? And Kasparov just went full checkmate mode, like, and was like, look, you wouldn't say that about Koreans, right? You have South Korea, which is, you know, for all intents and purposes, a Western thriving democracy. Then you have North Korea, which is the pinnacle of, and I think it's not to do with Koreans, right? It's to do with the geopolitics. Like, China is why North Korea is the way it is. And
Russia, yeah. Or the USSR, anyway.
So I think it's genuinely due to the politicians. I mean, but on the flip side of what I just said, democracy is actually kind of real. Like, people do get what they want to some extent, or at least they will get what they don't push back against hard enough. So Australians, it's so hard to know what's real, right? Like, how do you gauge it? Because if I see, like, a new measure brought out in the UK, which is also really bad and where I'm originally from, or Australia, there'll be like a tweet about it from some, you know, some mainstream media publication saying, you know, lockdowns to be extended by, you know, Tone was going crazy about this. Like, one 83-year-old man died of COVID, or with COVID, I should say, with COVID. And they went military lockdown after that. Like, helicopters going around areas where people were known to be less compliant. Like, straight up martial law from one guy above, like, his expected, you know, well, life expectancy, you know. But generally what I'm saying is the responses I see, even though it's not statistically valid, I mean, anecdotes are pretty much all you have to go on in this sort of 1984 style world anyway. Like, it's so hard to trust, like, you know, big scale studies. So anecdotally, I just see the responses, and people are like actually annoyed that their government isn't going harder. They're actually frustrated with it. And yeah, like we were talking about at the conference, I think there are psychological factors. One is Stockholm Syndrome, which is if you've had everything screwed up for you, then it's really hard to admit that it was not actually worth it. It's the equivalent of the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, you take on a trade, it goes in a bad direction, and you hold on to it irrationally, even though you have new information, you know it's not a good trade, but you hold on to it anyway. And that's what people are doing with COVID, because it's really hard to change direction with that, I think. And then there's also
there's no way you can sell either and like make any money off of it. So it's like
capitulation doesn't get you something back because you might as well go along with it. You've had the first 2 shots. You might as well get the third because why get the first 2 shots and then lose your freedom if getting the third is what's required for your freedom? Yeah. So there's that. But then there's also this way more dark part of it, which we got into in the conference as well, which is that you have these nasty parts of the human condition, right, that people don't really want to acknowledge. And that's actually really true of Canadians, because Canadians are known for this, like, super friendly, and it's okay, but there's always this dark under that, like, who is it? Who is the guy with the shadow? I think it's Carl Jung, who talks about the shadow. And there's this idea that there's this nasty part of you that is real and you can't ever pretend isn't real. Like, you have to acknowledge it, you got to incorporate it, you got to integrate it, and you got to know what it's capable of. And it's like this biblical concept of the meek shall inherit the earth. And meek meaning it's not that you're a complete, like, daisy flower and capable of no damage whatsoever, because there's no honor in that. Yeah, the idea is
meekness is not weakness.
Exactly. It's the concept is you're capable of extreme damage, but you're powerful and you don't use it. You use it to the best of your extent. You know what it is, you incorporate it, and you use it for good. So that's not incorporated. Like, everyone's just told, we got a lot of noise here, but I think the signal should be good.
Yeah. We should be good.
We're at the Horsepower Ranch, guys.
And there's a lot of horsepower being,
I think we got like 30 more of these vehicles to go by, so it should be all right. I'm talking right into the microphone. So there's this unincorporated shadow thing, and I think it ties in again with that whole weak men create hard times. Like, we've had very good times. People haven't had to incorporate their shadow. People are very friendly. People are very afraid of confrontation, and people are very up for complying, and that's especially true in countries like Canada. And people don't want to be confrontational, especially Canadians. So I think it's just, there's the Stockholm syndrome, there's the unincorporated shadow, and then there's just the thrill as well. It's fun. And, like, I know this because originally I fell into that trap. When COVID first came around in January, around December or January 2020, it was the first thing I'd do in the morning. I'd get up, refresh the page. How many cases are there today? How many? It's thrilling. It's scary.
It's a morbid thrill.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's a horrible thing, but I was totally in that trap too. So I know that there are people that are still in that, and they enjoy it. They tell you 600,000 people died in America. I'm like, first off, no, they didn't. They just didn't. Okay, like, yes, well, they did. But how many people died the year previous and the year previous? Same amount, right? But from different diseases, weirdly, because the stats are all being disingenuously presented, and everyone's got a statistic that supports their position. But so I think it's a whole combination of various psychological factors that make people just go, I kind of want this. Like, people like, and then there's the whole let's go Ayn Rand on the whole thing. Like, you get an excuse not to have to grow up. We'll take responsibility for your life or your health or your finances or any of that stuff. Government says you're not allowed to work. Don't worry. Here's a bunch of money. And we've seen that over and over again. And, Biden is going insane with the money printing. And
not just Biden, right? Trudeau too, right?
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing. Like, this is why Bitcoin is so... None of us expected Bitcoin to quite be where it is so soon, I think. I expected things to take longer, but COVID just accelerated the timeline. I think COVID has been great for Bitcoin because, well, for so many reasons.
Well, unfortunately, we've had to suffer as a result. But, yeah, I mean, the thing that's interesting to me about that is the political situation has changed quite a bit. And this may be a pretty good transition. You used to be sort of like a digital nomad. You've lived in a lot of places, and this was sort of like a lifestyle for you. So let's start with that. What were you doing? What led you to become a digital nomad? And what were sort of like the things that you were thinking about as you did that?
Yeah, I can go right back to like crazy early here. Like, I started as a musician when I was 10 years old. My father's a musician, and I was just an apprentice. school became pretty irrelevant pretty quickly. I studied music and did very badly at it because I was too busy being a professional musician to write any of the essays that you need to, like
music theory.
Yeah, exactly.
Essays, yeah.
Yeah, that was a funny. I remember when I got my A-level results, I was doing this huge musical in London, and I got my results that morning, and I'd failed just about everything I did. And I remember being like, does this matter? Because I'm about to go on stage to like 4,000 people and do this huge tribute show to, it was called Thriller Live. It was a Michael Jackson tribute show, and it was enormous. And I remember just being like, I don't think I need to worry about these terrible A-level results. I always that was, we grew up, I'm a 90s kid, and everything is so cynical. I always characterize it with, this is a tangent, I'm going to go back to what I was saying, but I always thought like the comedy of the 90s and the next decade, it was always characterized by sort of underlying cynicism, though it's actually appropriate because all of our institutions are in this fourth turning rotten period where nothing really works anymore, and education's particularly true. So I do think I'm glad I felt like maybe I'm being lazy here, and I felt judged by my grandfather and people that are like, you need to go to Cambridge or Oxford, all that stuff. You're going to be a musician, really? I was like, I don't see the point in going to university. And now, basically, to me, it seems like if you want to get employed by some powerful startup in the Bitcoin space, they almost think you're a sucker if you went and got a degree. So I'm like, I thought it was all nonsense. And that's kind of like, so what? You spent $200,000 to get a degree that, and was it worth it? Like, I don't think so. So anyway, I went that route. I'm glad I did. I don't know if my intuition was right. Maybe, and I was also just lazy. I don't know what balance of the two there were. But I was a musician, and trying to get musicians interested in Bitcoin, that's just something that was so difficult to do. And this is why I recently connected with Keith Levine, who's a punk musician. He founded The Clash. He's been on a bunch of Bitcoin podcasts. He was on Peter McCormack's podcast, and I think he's been on Tales from the Crypt as well. And he was talking about music, just saying there's just the only thing punk in the world now is Bitcoin. And it's not just a coincidence that it's called cypherpunk technology, or the ideology is called the cypherpunk movement. And I reached out to him in like a second and was like, dude, I so relate, because I used to play for even the people he was talking about, like Amy Winehouse, and I just was, where's the attitude in all this? Why is everything just corporate bootlicking? Like, that's not what music was never at. And it's such a gutless industry now. So by around 2011, around 2010, 2011, I started doing the biggest things I'd done in music. I played for Donna Summer, Sam Moore from Sam and Dave, and a bunch of like pop stars from the UK that you wouldn't know about now, but that were famous for 15 minutes. And I started to do all right. But I discovered Bitcoin at the same time and couldn't get anyone interested in it at all. And then by the time 2012 came around, I was fully in by that point. That was it. I was obsessed with Bitcoin, and then I ended up sort of falling out, I guess, with the singer I was playing for at the time. We'd been on tour for a couple of years, and it wasn't like I was his piano player. He wanted his old piano player back, which I understood, and I was sort of left drifting a bit aimlessly. I'd done all of the gigs I'd been doing prior to that were sort of mid-level, like a lot of bar mitzvahs and weddings and stuff like that, but suddenly I'd gone a bit bigger. I was doing like tours with, really nice equipment and getting treated really well, staying in great hotels. I didn't really want to go back to that. So I was kind of left a bit aimless for a while. I had a bit of savings with no interest, obviously. So, and, after around mid-2012, Silk Road came around, and I started learning how to use Tor and PGP and all these technologies, and I was really into the ideology of the cypherpunk movement. Like, we had these beautiful pillars of freedom. We had PGP, we had Tor, we had Bitcoin, and Julian Assange was just talking about how this was, you have the nuclear bomb and you have asymmetric or public key cryptography. Like, the universe allows these two things, and the nuclear bomb allows incredible power. It doesn't, physics doesn't have to work that way, but it does. And public key cryptography doesn't have to work the way it does, but it does. And he's saying this, he believes in the freedom this can offer individuals. And I was even looking at it, like, even back then, appreciating how governments making drugs illegal helps everything, because it incentivizes the creation of all these bulletproof kinds of technologies. In the end, that hasn't really worked out as far as I can see, the darknet markets. But yeah, so I got into it deeply in 2012. Started mining with my laptop. I still have that laptop. I bought a new MacBook Pro just to have a great. I didn't know enough to figure out how to like buy a proper graphics card. Eventually, I did and destroyed a computer trying to and paid like a £400 electricity bill to mine half a Bitcoin or something, which was worth like £2.
Well, I mean, it's worth it now.
Exactly. Yeah. That was the thing. I was still living at home, and my parents were like, "What? No, you're paying the electricity bill this month, And I was like, you'll get it." But I mean, they get it now. Don't worry. But at the time, it was hard to explain. And to be honest, I still could have bought. Instead of buying the graphics card and the electricity, I could have bought like 30 Bitcoins. So it wasn't actually worth it.
It wasn't a very good trade, no.
Yeah, so to finish that all up, at the end of 2012, I saw the price start to, suddenly creep up again. I'd missed the bubble to $37. That was the first bubble. I missed that one. And the next bubble was, early 2013, and we had a double top in that year. And by 2013, I was set to go to Sweden to record an album. We went in March and April 2013. If you remember what the price did then. Yeah, the rest of the band weren't very happy with me because I just couldn't pay attention to the music. I was obsessed with Bitcoin. I had a bot on Twitter that told me every thread on Bitcoin talk that would get like a lot of noise. So I would read everything I could possibly read. And I went down the rabbit hole. I experienced my first bear market, which was summer 2013, right? That was my first bear market, and it was the hardest thing I think I've ever gone through. And then, obviously, it took a couple of months to shake it off. Then it went all the way up to 1,000, and I just couldn't believe it. And, then, the rest is history. But by that time, I was a full-on Bitcoiner. But I didn't really realize until the fork wars in 2017 that I pretty much would go down with the ship with this thing. And unless it died due to a bug or something like that, if it was just attacked, I would defend it with everything I have, because I don't believe anything has quite the power. Nothing man-made has the power that Bitcoin has to get us out of the hole we're in. And then COVID comes along, and you're like, God, we really need. What would the world be without Bitcoin right now? Yeah. Wow.
Well, so all right. So I have a few things that I want to talk about within what you said. But the first thing is so you're traveling around. Yeah. What happened around so you're going to Sweden and what happened after that? Where did you go and how did you end up becoming sort of this digital nomad, and what were you doing at that time?
Yeah, so I forgot to even address that. The musician lifestyle had led me to be used to just traveling around with this bag here and a laptop in it, and just, when you're on tour, you don't bring your own keyboards and stuff. All the techs deal with that stuff. So I was used to traveling around Europe and all that stuff, and I was used to it. It was a great lifestyle, the digital nomad lifestyle. I still had a basic base at my parents' house, but I wasn't there very much. From the years 2013 to 2016, I was still living at my parents' house, and I wasn't doing music anymore. So it was pretty much, I moved to America for a little bit within that. I did various bits and pieces just moving around. I still had a band going, but I wasn't really giving it the attention it deserved because Bitcoin was taking too much energy. And so that eventually sort of dissolved in around 2016. But 2016 was where I just started renting around London and moving around various places just because I would have been around 25 or something. And I didn't want to be living with my parents anymore, for obvious reasons. But then 2017 had such a psychological toll on me because, like you were saying at the conference, it's all very well saying Bitcoin thrives under adversarial conditions, but it's stressful when you're in those conditions. And Bitcoin was being attacked like nothing you've ever seen, and I didn't think we would win. I was oh ye of little faith. Bitcoin survived, and it survived laughingly easily, but. At the time, from all of 2016 and all of 2017, all I did was sit on Reddit. And, I would wake up in the morning and have 100 unread messages on Reddit. And just all of them would be from big blocker trolls. And, and I would answer all of them, eat breakfast, go to the gym, come back from the gym, and there'd be another 100 messages. This is all I would do. That was it. And so 2017 played at that point I was living in Camden with a musician friend of mine, and Bitcoin was obviously just having its best year at the time price-wise. It was just flying up, but at the same time I was running out of money. All of my savings that I'd had from music that were slowly evaporating, because I got paid well to go on tour and all that, and I was living at my parents for most of that time, so I got to pocket everything. But in 2017, when I moved into a really expensive place in Camden, I was paying like over $1,000 US rent a month, which was a lot to me at the time with no job. And it was 2016, late 2016, so we weren't obviously going to do that amazing bull run yet. So I was like, I'm going to have to get a job, and I don't really want to work in music anymore. And I was ready for it. But then Bitcoin did what it did in 2017. We fought, we won, we got SegWit, but there were all these hard forks, which was just free money just being thrown at us. It was incredible. Like every day there'd be some new ridiculous Bitcoin excellent or Bitcoin super awesome, like every day. And it would just, and if, even if the value of them was like $50 each, for every Bitcoin you own, that's a lot of money. Like, so... Bitcoin Cash was obviously lucrative, and all of these things I would just sell straight away. But by the end of it, what I did was Bitfinex had, I swear all this comes back to the digital nomad stuff eventually. Bitfinex had a thing where there was this SegWit 2X New York agreement whole business, which I imagine people listening to this have a brief understanding of anyway. Basically, a bunch of CEOs and influential business people in the Bitcoin space decided amongst themselves that we'd all agreed that blocks were going to be made larger in exchange for SegWit. And the plebs, like us, all said, well, we're not doing that. So you've agreed amongst yourselves, we don't agree to it. And they were like, yes, you did. And we were like, it was all just gaslighting. And we were like, you guys met in a hotel room and decided something, Yeah. So anyway, Bitfinex decided, okay, we're going to make this thing exist before even the fork, where even the block height where the fork would occur. We're going to create a futures market for it. And we're going to allow you to sell the fork before it even exists, or sell the incumbent Bitcoin chain in favor of the fork. And we're going to see with a futures market, and I know Aaron Van Weerdem is a big fan of this method of the economic free market method of discovering what's...
There's a lot of people that are fans of that,
It's a good method, and but it still was one of the most stressful things I've ever done, because I had to move some Bitcoin and leave it on Bitfinex at the height of the Tether FUD. And I was watching Tone Vase, and I think you were doing the news show with him at the time. The Tether FUD was not very reassuring at all, and that was, I was worried that
especially at Bitfinex,
but I will say Adam Back reassured me personally and was like, look, Bitfinex are good actors, and when Adam Back vouches for something, I will give it a lot of leeway, because I don't know, he's just such an excellent advocate, and but nonetheless, for 6 weeks I basically had everything I own on Bitfinex. And guess what? Jeff Garzik off by one errored the whole thing, so none of the contract was valid. All of the posturing that had been done, all of the confidence from like Vinnie Lingham and Brian Armstrong and all these people, Eric Voorhees and all that, turned out to be nothing. The minute the futures market exists, their coin plummeted to zero. But you got pretty much 30% of every Bitcoin you put in there extra.
So you got 30%.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it was incredible. And trying to explain that to my accountant was fun. I'm like, what was this thing you sold? I'm like, it never existed. I sold it before. But I mean,
I sold a future or something.
Yeah. I mean, so that thing, but because there was an off by one error, not only had I been through 6 weeks of stress, and I started smoking an insane amount of weed and just in an unhealthy way. I hope that's not too annoying for anyone listening.
I think it should be okay. Yeah.
So, but the worst thing about it was I was ready. I was crossing off the days literally like a prisoner. Like when I get my... Because I didn't have Bitcoin anymore. I had BT1 tokens, which would become Bitcoin when the fork would occur. But according to the contract Bitfinex had made. But because there was an off by one error, every exchange that was doing this took the snapshot at the wrong block height. And they said, okay, well, now we just have to wait until the 31st of December. This was our fallback. So suddenly it was another 6 weeks. And I was like, my time in this torture of not my keys, not my coins, that's all going to continue. It was the most horrific feeling. And what I did was I ended up buying a bunch of the shitcoin tokens, recombining them into Bitcoin and pulling it off.
Yeah, because they were so cheap.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember just being like, it's worth it. I'm going to take that hit. And I think it cost me a few $1,000s to do it. But it meant I had all my Bitcoin back under my control. But anyway, all this is to say, by this point, was just such a mental wreck. I'd been through so much stress and so much, fighting and battling for Bitcoin. Like we got SegWit, we never knew if it was going to happen. We'd fought off, Bitmain's attacks. We fought off Roger Vere's disinformation. We fought off Bitcoin.com. We fought off Reddit/BTC, and now we'd fought off all of the big exchanges in the spaces, trying to force big blocks on us that we didn't want, and we'd won. But finally, we were back in this place, and the top of the market came suddenly, and then it was, we had all these altcoins too, right? We had 2017 was the highest altcoins have ever been, because in terms of Bitcoin, nothing has ever recovered to that. Like Ethereum, all these shit coins, nothing's ever. 2017 was the height of Bitcoin, crypto stupidity. So I had to deal with that too. I had everyone that I'd ever met in the music industry suddenly phoning me up, asking me about nonsense, like
what do you think about Ripple?
Exactly, and just that just got annoying, and but then December, the crash came, all the stress came. Like I had to deal with this basic abuse of cannabis that I got into, and admit that I just had a total dysfunctional relationship with a plant sort of thing. So I went up. I don't know. I'm hesitant to talk about this, but I'm going to do it. I decided. Usually I would take a big psychedelic, have a big psychedelic experience to kind of clean me out. And I did, and nothing happened at all. And I was like, wow, I need to go to Peru. And a Bitcoiner I know, I'd helped dump one of the hard forks, because it was one of these hard forks that hadn't incorporated SegWit.
Yeah.
So, but if your coins were sitting at, this was nested SegWit.
Yeah.
If your coins were sitting at those addresses, it was much harder. You had to derive the, well, you know better than anyone. You had to derive the legacy address. The nested SegWit address was like being. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but at the time I knew
it was
how
a pay-to-pub key address that was derived from a pay-to-script hash address or something to that effect.
Exactly. Yeah. So I remember trying to write a Python script that would extract it for you, And anyway, I managed to help him dump it, and he made thousands of dollars from it. And so what happened after that was. But we never met, right? And I had the opportunity to rip him off, because he sent me his private keys. His Bitcoin had already moved, but I still could have stolen everything. I never met him, and we'd never met each other. And anyway, I helped him sell all this stuff, and he sent me a bunch of money afterwards, which he also didn't have to do. We were just two anonymous avatars. So that all happened, and funnily enough, for some reason, divine coincidence, he just mentioned Peru. And I was like, Peru, hey, what do you know about ayahuasca? And he was like, I'm deep into it. And he told me, here's where you need to go. Here's the shaman you need to see, all that stuff. 2 days later, I was in Peru, and I was like, fix my head to the shamans there. And, I went through a lot of wonderful stuff, a lot of pain and suffering. And I got back to London and was like, when I left Peru, I was thinking, this was horrible. I hate this. It was nice the first night, and now I just hate this place. I want to get out of this shithole. The bed smells of vomit from people puking up all night, and it's just horrible. So I got out of there. I wasn't even polite to people. I was like, God, screw this place. Screw you guys. I'm going home. So I got back to London and was like, oh, this is what's wrong. I hate this city. I was just born here. But there's nothing about it I like. I can't breathe. The food is horrible. The people are all just claustrophobic and sick of. So I decided to go and meet that guy I helped, and he lived in BC, Canada, because I was like, we need to meet anyway. This is too incredible. So I went there and met him, and then I met, while I was traveling around the Gulf Islands in BC, I met Joyce, who we have a family now, and everything just snowballed from there. I got Canadian residency, all that. I live in Canada, and now Canada's become what it is, but nonetheless, I was still just sort of free again. I decided I need to get out of London. I'm going to travel around and pack a suitcase, then Peru, then Canada, then Peru again, and it's always been my lifestyle to just move around like that, and this conference lifestyle as well is great. You get to move around. So yeah, that's been my life. That's my life story, roughly.
Relatively speaking. Yeah. There's a lot there. And I want to get back to something that you said about sort of your experience as a musician. You talked about how it's kind of sold out, right? And there's no punk in it anymore. Can you describe what punk means to you, and why really Bitcoin is the only thing that's actually punk anymore?
Yeah, it's an attitude and a state of mind. It's kind of hard to sum it up in a sentence, but if you have an inherent and you have the inability to respect authority. Just you don't have that knee-jerk reaction where you think, I need to do what I'm told, or you have the ability to deal with the awkwardness of going against the grain, because it's hard walking through an airport without a mask and having people tell you off. It's hard. Like, it's scary. And, you know, to have that attitude, it's not something you see in the music industry, because everyone wants to get a deal, or, you know, or a publishing deal or a record deal or something like that. And you gotta behave. Like, record labels don't want a risky thing. They don't want someone that's going to use the wrong pronouns, like in an interview. No way. Like, they're not that brave. Like, even though all publicity is good publicity, and but you'll just get erased now. It won't blow up like a controversy. It will just be, oh, that person doesn't exist anymore. They got dropped. You know, it would be like those back when being gay was not a good thing in American music industry. Like, I think it was either George Michael or Elton John. It was not discussed. It was never known what they were. And I think one of them, when it came out, got dropped from their record label.
Oh, wow.
So it's not like a good and controversial thing, like where all publicity is good publicity kind of thing. It's actually just don't do it. Like, behave like you're straight, okay? The women love you. Like, the Christians are going to absolutely lynch you if you know, it was that sort of assumption, right? So music now has just become... I can't begin to tell you how much of a bootlicking industry it is. People, like, you just have to behave, and it's so stifling. And not just in the, like, you know, playing weddings and functions at weekends, but also just on big scale stuff as well. Like, you know, dealing with record labels. They want you to have the appearance of rebelliousness and all that, but they want it very tightly contained, and they want it, you know, they want it controlled destruction, maybe I should call it. They want it all contained like that, and it makes sense. I mean, everything's been very manufactured in music for a long time now. It's not the 60s, and it's a sad state of affairs, and everything, I think it's just another institution that's in decay, and I'm wondering what eventually will happen. Like, there should be a soundtrack to the cypherpunk movement and you know, the anti-COVID thing, and I'm thinking, God, it is punk, isn't it? Because I've found myself for the last 10 years, like, people ask me, like, what do you want to listen to? And I'm like, I don't know. There's just no music around. like I've been through everything. Like, and I was just like, and I'm a musician, right? I'm a multi-instrumentalist, and I'm sitting here like, what do I want to listen to? Like, because everything that's been done for the last 30 years is just retro nostalgia. Like, the 90s was a rehash of the 70s. The next 2 decades were basically the 80s done again. Then in the 2010s, it was Americans discovering house music from Europe. And instead of it having all these drug connotations, they just called it EDM. And it was really, really just unadventurous and really, really stale. And now, then dubstep had a little bit of time. Like, obviously the 90s had hip-hop come out of it. That was huge. But there's just been, now, I don't, like, it feels, I genuinely feel like music isn't even made by humans anymore. I feel like some Rihanna songs, I feel like this is just an algorithm that just churned this out in 5 minutes. The lyrics, they actually sound like the kind of stuff Google Translate would throw at you. Like, I don't even believe it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm wondering what the soundtrack is. And then when I met Keith, I was like, obviously, the soundtrack that needs to come out now organically is punk. It's going to have that attitude, even if it doesn't sound like punk used to. It's going to be that. It's going to sound like that, and it's going to match. It's got to be something that's, you know, violently anti-establishment, because the establishment is so violent. Like, you know, you can't, you're going to have to fight fire with fire on this one. Like, yeah, we can do it peacefully with Bitcoin, which roots around, and it's a peaceful revolution. But, you know, that's financial sovereignty and freedom. But what about freedom of assembly, freedom of association? Like, there's a bunch of other essential freedoms that are just gone now that we're going to have to fight to get back.
Yeah, what you said reminds me of this documentary I watched on the Insane Clown Posse a while back. You know, like, this is like the craziest band ever, right? Like, it's a bunch of black dudes, like, dressed up as clowns, and they say, like, really, like, profanity-laced, like, songs about, like, just completely... And the documentary was essentially like, yeah, they even co-opted these guys, right? Like, somehow the music industry got them to essentially submit. And in a sense, like, I wonder about, you know, like, having that level of rebelliousness, because it's something that the music industry loves, is that, like, that rebel feel, and whatever it takes, right? Even if it's Insane Clown Posse, right? Just absolutely off the wall, crazy stuff. they'll go and co-opt it and somehow get them to bend the knee. Like, how do you get it to not bend the knee, right? Like, what do you do?
I think it's one of those things that's just an emergent inevitability. Like, something comes along, like The Prodigy were a good example. Like, rave, the genre rave, I think it was called. Like, and there was no control in that. It was out of nowhere. This one genius called Liam Howlett and this album, The Fat of the Land, with a crab on it, like... It just broke all the rules. Like, it just, the minute you heard that, you were like, that's it, I want to go crazy. Like, let's find a cop and, like, just, you know, like, it was incredible. But the trouble is, once it exists and once the emotional connotations exist for people and, you know, a genre has a sort of feeling that you can become sort of into. And all that can happen is just a record label can go out and pay someone to replicate it and do a similar thing and keep them in a contractual obligation where they're sort of on a leash instead. Like, so once it gets established, it can just be co-opted straight away. Like, it can be presented to you, marketed to you by people that don't really want to take unnecessary risk. And it reminds me a lot of Bitcoins to shitcoins, because you can take Bitcoin's code and you can basically reuse it, but you won't have anything like what Bitcoin is because you can't replicate that, because Bitcoin is genuinely organic and it has we know about the self-reinforcing mechanism that Bitcoin has and the way it raises the bar for decentralization, so nothing else really can be considered decentralized, especially in the crypto space. But when, like, you have these things that, like, Litecoin is, if you just look at the code, it's Bitcoin with a couple of variables tweaked, but we know it's not. We know Litecoin is not Bitcoin, but it's almost metaphysical. It isn't, right? Like, and it's the same with music. Like, you can come along and you can make another band that's part of the same genre.
I mean, we've seen that in spades, right? Like, I still remember the 90s, and it was alternative band after alternative band that were... Like, it sounded exactly the same, right? Like, same emo, same outfits, same, like, instrument. Everything was the same. It was, what the heck?
I know. The music industry went 1984 before everything else. Like, alternative and independent. What do these mean? Oh, it means this exact sound. Like, you'll never, ever escape
It's not an alternative to anything, and it's not independent of anything, but that's what we'll call it,
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was just, like... It was such a sad time, and I do go on about The Simpsons, because The Simpsons, they were intelligent, like, poignant writers, right, that understood the zeitgeist, and as a result, everything in there is miserable. Like, everything doesn't work properly. Like, no one can be trusted. Institutions are all liars. Like, everyone's selfish. Everyone's shallow in their thinking, and it took me a long time to realize, like, oh, that's just this part of time. That's not humans in general. Right? There is a return to optimism right now, and I think... You know, there's reason to be optimistic. Like, it's nice to be at the bottom. Like, humanity is climbing out of the ditch right now, I think. And it's nice to actually be
You think we hit bottom? Really?
Yeah, I think things are so bad because we bottomed, and now we have it's like, you know, you steered the ship to the right, the steering wheel's center now, but the ship is still, like, careening around to the right, you know? Yeah. Something like that. Maybe we didn't, but...
Well, you seem to be an optimist there. But there is this attitude of punk that is common sort of in, you know, Bitcoin and in music. That's an interesting parallel. So, I mean, talking more about... So talking more about, like, your personal life, you're finding Canada quite oppressive.
Absolutely.
So... What's your solution? What are your plans? And how are you sort of evaluating what's going on everywhere else?
Well, my main... paradigm that I'm seeing the world through is you have the option of comfort, or you have the option of doing what is staring you in the face as necessary. And the main reason people wouldn't flee an obviously oppressive, tyrannical... Well, there are two, actually. But if you're living in... Sorry to do this. If you're living in Nazi Germany in the 30s, and you're Jewish, or, you know, you're black, or something like an oppressed minority by the Nazis... And if you have the intelligence to know where that's going to end up, then the only reason you wouldn't leave, the predominant reason you wouldn't leave is because you don't want to disrupt your comfort, as far as I can tell. And now with COVID, you have the additional reason that there's nowhere obvious to actually go, because this is a global, COVID hysteria is global, and it's unpredictable. Like, not Jews could just flee to America and they were good, but... There's nowhere of it. COVID nomads it's a complicated thing. And I've recently, like, we only just met, like, in person this conference, but I'd reached out to a bunch of people that were in the Bitcoin space that I just sort of thought would be in the same area, and Giacomo was one of them. And I just asked him, like, look, you don't know me, but here's my situation. I have a family. I'm half Jewish. A lot of my family were killed in the Holocaust. I can see the way things are going. I don't need to wait for it to get that bad before I go, oh, now I'm going to leave, because then it's too late. So rather than risk it, I think I want to get out of here. Where do I go? And I didn't expect him to respond. And then I got a 45-minute voice note response. I was like, wow, thank you. And I had to listen to it and, like, you know, keep going through it with a baby crying at me and stuff. But yeah, I was encouraged by that. And Alex Svetsky's got some great ideas as well. So my idea is basically, there's a whole bunch of trade-offs you got to make, right? The IRS definitely scare me a lot in America, because once you're on their radar, you'll never really get off it. But Texas and Florida are obviously amazing. And in Bitcoin 2021, I experienced Florida and was like, this is absolutely incredible. I'm so, like, it was my first time at a Bitcoin conference, meeting everyone. I'd underestimated how emotionally, like, poignant that would be for me. That in and of itself is amazing, but in the context of lockdowns and masks and all that, being in Miami with no one caring about it, all Bitcoiners, all dead, united in, I mean, we saw like 15 people out of the 12,000 wearing masks, right? Like, and it was just like, what are you doing? But nonetheless, it was like, I was in tears at the end of that conference. Just I was so moved by what I'd experienced. Like, I got to meet, like, one after the other, every one of these people I'd been, you know, reading and learning from for 10 years. Like, it was incredible. So, you know, I met Max Kaiser, I met Peter Todd, like, all of these people that, like, anyway. So Florida obviously is amazing, but Texas, Texas is a pretty special place. It's a place we made fun of a lot. You know, from my background, we make fun of these sorts of king of the hill type people. You know,
it's from Texas.
Yeah, but now I find myself going, that's actually an obvious place to go. So if I can get over my sort of hang up about the IRS and how, because I mean, the IRS is oppressive, right? Like, the tax authorities aren't like that bad in other countries. I've dealt with CRA, the Canadian Revenue Agency. I've dealt with the Inland Revenue, which is the UK. Neither of them are that bad. Like, they're all right. Like, if you make a mistake, they'll be like, oh, it's a mistake. They're not punitive. Like, the IRS seems to be a nasty thing to deal with.
It depends. And, you know, if you make a mistake, you know, they'll penalize you a little bit, but it's not like, you know, you have to pay quadruple your income tax or something like that. Like, that would be oppressive. But yeah, I mean, sort of getting back to this whole thing, like, you've lived a life that's very much like one of, you know, anti-authoritarian, you know, like,
Absolutely.
sort of like, you know, go around wherever and, you know, see what the world has for you. But now you're a family man. Like, how's that sort of changed your perspective, and what are you planning going forward?
Well, it means I have to get it right. Like, I can't experiment as much. I have to just really research and then go, this is it. Because it's so disruptive. Like, having a baby is so hard. Like, that's it. Just having a baby alone is hard. Like, and disrupting your comfort is, you know, just getting enough sleep is a privilege. And, like, when you're underslept, everything is 1,000 times harder. Like, your body, you know, inflammation disappears when you sleep, right? So I have to be really careful with my diet. I'm strict carnivore because, you know, that's the diet that causes the least inflammation. I think a lot of people would agree. So it means you've got to be careful, and I've got to get all my ducks lined up. So Canada is looking, it's said in 3 weeks we're going to have vaccine passports in Quebec, I believe. And where I live, BC, I think they will, I don't see why they wouldn't follow along with that. Trudeau's bought hundreds of millions of shots worth of Pfizer and Moderna. I think it's Pfizer he bought. And he's going to use them. He wants them in people's arms. If this whole thing
There's only 30 million people.
I know. Yeah, they want. Well, you know, you got to have your software update. I mean, booster jab. Like, the whole thing. It's almost. Look, I don't want to get all Alex Jonesy about it. I really don't. But like, it's almost like this is just the perfect thing. Like, if we could give you a vaccine that would work once, fair enough, and people could fake it and do whatever they're going to do, and but the fact that you have to have repeated shots now is it's almost lucky for the authoritarians that the vaccines don't work well enough. Great, because if you
they've turned the negative into a positive.
It's one thing to need a passport when you get into a country. It's another to need it on every street corner. Show me your papers. And it's just a more extreme version of one to the other, right? So mandatory vaccination is bad, but mandatory repeated vaccinations, it becomes so much harder to technologically work around that. Because look, we want to get around this, and I don't mind. I don't know how careful I should be in what I say, but we're not asking the Federal Reserve and banks to treat us differently. We're building Bitcoin, and we're getting around the way they treat us that way. And is it legal? Is it illegal? It's all kind of weird and hard to figure out, right? But same here. It's a medical form of tyranny instead of a financial form of tyranny. And there's got to be a way around this. And it's a new civil rights movement, in my opinion. But, sorry, let me stay on track, because you're asking me about what I'm going to do with the fact that I have a family now. I'm not living the lifestyle I used to. It's lamentable in that there's no, I can't just do things as freely and easily as I used to, because it's just too much punishment for Joyce and for my baby. But we still need to do it. So this is, we turned this conference in Mexico into an exploratory excursion around Baja, California, and we've checked out a lot of stuff. But Mexico might not be the place. I don't know. But if there is a place, and if there was no visa issues or, tax issues or anything complicating the issue, I would just go to Texas. It would be easy. But getting American green cards and things like that is not so easy. But I do work.
Easy at all.
No, but I work for Start9 now, and Start9 are an American company. So it's very possible that
they can sponsor your visa. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it might be possible, but like I said, I don't want to wait until, I think, when the weather gets cold again and cases start going up again and deaths start going up again, they are going to absolutely tighten the noose. So the idea is to be gone before they do that, and it's mid-August now. So I don't really think I don't want to be there past September.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So very soon, huh?
Yeah.
Well, so I think what you described earlier is, it brought to mind that there are sort of two worlds that are sort of emerging. There's sort of this fiat world where, the place where they are enforcing these vaccine passports, for example, tend to be first in federal government, right? You can't work for the military or for the government or something like that unless you are fully vaccinated, even if you've had COVID before or whatever. That seems to be the pattern that's going. And then they're obviously expanding, and fiat's tentacles are in absolutely everything. So it's a pretty big movement there. But then you have, people like us, right, that are in the Bitcoin camp that, don't think that forcing vaccination is an infringement on liberty. That seems to be do you expect us to have a chance against this monolithic, government with lots of guns and things like that?
Well, I recently saw a tweet that made me realize, of course, you've been looking at this thing wrong the whole time. The goal is not for us to all have the vaccine, though there is a strong financial incentive for that. The goal is to get us all to have this passport, this biometric, deeply personal, and eventually they will just say to all the people, the refuseniks and the vaccine, the anti-vaxxers and all that, as we've been characterized, they'll just say, fine, take the passport, because we can't deny you the civil liberties that, denied by not having this thing. You're not allowed into supermarkets, for God's sake. You're not allowed into airports. Civil liberties, agencies are all saying, privacy advocates and all these people are saying, you can't deny these people that. And rather than say, okay, we'll get rid of the vaccine passports, they'll just say, okay, you can all have them even if you haven't had the vaccine. We'll grant you an exemption. And then we sleepwalk into a brand new layer of, of authoritarianism through technology. And that's definitely coming. And I think that is ultimately the goal of it. Pfizer's profits and Moderna and all that, that's obviously leading to a lot of misleading stuff and, mal-incentivized press and all that stuff. But that's not ultimately, I think, the deep thing to fear. I think you'll get away without having to have the shot. But I think what's going to be really hard is resisting the passports. And that seems to be the end game. I think we have a shot nonetheless, but the trick is you just got to be in the right place before that happens. And Canada isn't the right place. And the entire Commonwealth isn't. Like the UK, Australia,
New Zealand,
they've all been particularly bad. And there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a reason it's not that bad in America. There's a bunch of reasons, right? You can't push Americans as hard as other cultures, because Americans are just, the whole country is predicated on freedom. And, you know, it's a republic that was founded on the principles of limiting what the state can do, not what the individuals can do. And people have talked about this a lot. I don't really have anything that uniquely insightful to say about America, but I will say I spent like my earlier woker years, like, because I was also woke, but just confused. Right? I was anti-government, but I was very confused at the same time. One thing I really disliked was how I got into Bitcoin. Was I didn't even talk about my time at Occupy Wall Street and all that stuff. That's actually how I discovered Bitcoin, and it was right as I was transitioning out of music. But American foreign policy was the nightmare. That was what I despised, and I really hated America for that. But America's a mixed bag, right? Yeah. And like Assange said, he has no illusions that if any other country was the dominant superpower, they'd be just as bad, right? Yeah. That's just comes with the territory of it, but it doesn't mean you throw away what's good about America. And it took me a long time to appreciate that. And you know, there's some Europeans particularly have a very derisory, like elitist, like dismissal of Americans, like, oh, you know, Americans, idiots, they don't know what irony means. Like,
I've traveled through Europe. I've gotten a little bit of that.
We feel smugly superior, but we're not. And like, if you're anyone that thinks like, if you remember what authoritarianism was in Europe, if you remember socialism, Nazism, if you remember these things, you just have to look at Americans and go, well done. Like, well done. Like,
you avoided this fate.
Yeah, like, for all our snobbish superiority complex, like, we are, like, look at Germany, look at Israel as well, by the way, but, I mean, that's only Europe if you watch the Eurovision Song Contest. but
it's not like they're going to participate in a Middle East thing, right? Like, that's generally not going to be a good idea.
Yeah, so I guess that's the point. Be where you need to be and, like, long it out. Like, so there's a whole bunch of people that have abandoned, like, I know, what's her name? Julia Turinsky, I can't say her last name. She abandoned Canada and went down to Texas.
Yeah. We're friends with her. Yeah, and she's near Austin.
Yeah. So it seems to be that's the place to go. So it's just a case of convincing my other half and, you know, being able to handle a lot of disruption and discomfort. Fortunately, the money isn't like, this would all be so much harder if I was broke. And thanks to Bitcoin, I'm not broke. So, you know,
and you don't have to go play bar mitzvahs,
Yeah, exactly. No more bar mitzvahs, please.
That's awesome. All right, so I think we're coming up on about an hour. So where can people find you? How can people contact you?
So I'm on Twitter. It's a shame to shill a big data platform like that, but that's probably the best way to contact me. It's at Grass-Fed Bitcoin. Sort of not me tipping my hat to good quality beef that, you know, the Bitcoiners are into, this carnivory thing. It's not a silly thing. It's a great thing. Also, I'm where else am I? I have a website, bitcoinmechanic.ca, but that is the business I had been running for a while. I'm not taking any new clients at the moment because I just don't have time, but I would help people, you know, set up full nodes or recover lost coins and things like that. And I don't have time for it right now. It says on the website, please don't hire me right now, because I can't be bothered to keep updating the form and saying I'm not around. So occasionally someone will just hire me and I'm like, oh God, now I have an appointment tomorrow at 3:00 when I'm on a flight. Like, so that's no good. But nonetheless, it has my YouTube channel, a link there to my YouTube channel. And I've got a lot of Bitcoin instructional videos there and some political discussions and a podcast I do with the guy I mentioned before, Keith Levine, one of the founders of the punk movement, and a friend of mine called Thomas Strolllight, another great Canadian Bitcoiner. And he's written some articles. I think you shared one of them, Jimmy. Yeah, these we do a podcast that's on my YouTube channel. So yeah, those are the two things you can find: my Twitter and my YouTube. And yeah, that's about it, I'd say.
All right. Well, that was a fast hour. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Unchained Capital is a sponsor of this podcast. I am an advisor to the company. I know the team well, and I'm excited for what they are building. If you need multi-sig, collaborative custody, or a Bitcoin native financial services partner, learn more at unchained.com. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Bitcoin Fixes This. Bitcoin Mechanic can be found at Grass-Fed Bitcoin and bitcoinmechanic.ca. Until next time, fiat.